Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today, I have another episode with Nikia.
Yes.
Nikia he said it perfectly himself before we decided to do this podcast. And that's that so many of the posts out there, so many of the podcasts out there, they always highlight the fat loss journey. They're like, come with me on my aggressive cut phase. Come along with me and see my results on X. And the thing is that it's kind of exciting to watch those things because you can see the changes happen on a week by week basis and you can tangibly measure fat loss progress because that's all we've ever been taught how to measure, which you would have heard me and even our podcast together with Nikias mention on how there's the scale weight, there's the progress photos, there's all of the typical things that you measure on like 12-week challenges. But when it comes to building muscle, the measures that we need to be focusing on are completely different than those of fat loss because it happens on a different time scale. It happens on a completely different metric system. It's not in weeks. It's hardly even in months, but we pretty much measure in months. And it's not until those months start to accumulate past the 6-month mark that things start to feel a little bit more like they are happening for you, but they don't usually feel like they're happening for you, which is where I want you to start because I know that you talk about the mindset of this, but they don't feel like they're happening for you when you're in the process of building muscle because you feel like you're getting fatter, you feel like you're bulking up. And especially from the female perspective, I know because of the transgender as well that this is something that is so atypical to females. But we feel like we're getting bigger. We feel like we're gaining more fat. We worry if maybe it's hormonal or maybe my biggest fear, you can bring in your one as well, but my biggest fear and my biggest story that I told myself is I gain so easily, but I gain fat easily. I don't gain muscle easily. I used to call myself an endomorph because I'm like, well, I gain fat easily, not muscle. So I'm not a mesomorph, but then there's no real such thing as body types anyway. There's like no such thing. So with that, we're going to be talking about our process with building muscle because I've done a 3-year build before. So I'm going to talk about that in reference as well. And me initiating my new process, which as we will come to get you to realize, you need a solid, predictable structure and routine to be able to build this off before you can have the confidence in it, which is where I'm coming from with first building a routine with my systems and showing up to training at a new schedule, which I'm still trying to force myself to get used to, and then being able to fuel for that. Go ahead.
Ruby, first of all, thank you very much for having me back on your podcast. And hello, everyone. In case you don't know who I am an online fitness coach and a certified nutritionist. And also, as Ruby referenced, I am a transgender man. So just that we're all on the same page about this. Now, Ruby invited me to talk about, as she said, our process. And I thought, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the fact that I have been in a muscle building phase in a surplus, so a bulk, since the beginning of October 2024. And I wanted to talk about this because, as she said, most people will discuss their fat loss phases, which is excellent, so that we can all gain an insight into how the process that works not only in general, but specifically for one person. However, when it comes to their bulking phases, people don't often talk about them, and even more specifically, they will not post about them as often as they would about fat loss phases. And I think that perpetuates the idea that bulking is a negative part of the physique development process, because instead of pursuing the loss of fat, we are actually accepting to put on weight and therefore a little bit of body fat. I think that when you don't see those physique changes because people won't post about them that happen in a bulk, this can make you think that bulking is worse, in quotation marks, than what it actually is, whereby you might have heard so-called horror stories where people gain a lot of weight very fast, called, and these are types of bulks called dreamer bulks, because you don't see examples or very many examples of what the type of bulk that I would conduct might look like, a much more moderate approach to bulking that is more effective according to the evidence, then you might be led to believe that you need to be afraid of bulking, and that makes you less likely to do it. So I thought, all right, if we're going to talk about our own process, I'm going to share my own story about bulking. So where I'm going to start is where I was at the beginning of October when I decided to start this bulk. So I had just undergone top surgery. So at the end of August, I had that operation, and then I was out of the gym for 6 weeks in order to recover. Leading up to the operation, so from the start of 2024, around the end of January 2024, up until the operation, I had been through a cycle of 2 mini cuts between the end of January and the start of March, about 6 weeks, and then one just before the operation. And then in between, I had undergone a period of maintenance and about 4 months in a surplus. The maintenance phase was very short. And this was because I still wanted to build as much muscle as possible, but I also wanted to be pretty lean for surgery, because the leaner that you can be for that particular surgery, the easier it is for the surgeon to sculpt your chest. Hence why I introduced the 2 mini cuts. Now, since I was that lean and I maintained that leanness throughout the 6 weeks that I was recovering, I also obviously lost a little bit of muscle, and my body underwent the opposite of body recomposition, where without training for 6 weeks, I lost a little bit of muscle and I put on a little bit of fat, even though my weight didn't change. By the end of the 6 week recovery period, I was really excited to build as much muscle as I possibly could, because I had been waiting for that surgery since 2018, which is when I found out about it. So the waiting list is very long in the UK. I was lucky to have it, in the time that I had it. I could have waited even longer. Some people do. So all of my training, my entire bodybuilding journey had been geared towards being ready for this surgery. And especially between January and August, the entirety of my nutritional phases were geared towards being ready for that particular day, meaning that I had felt a little bit stifled and in my potential to build muscle, because I had this date by which I needed to be a certain degree of leanness. So once the date was done, I had the surgery done, and I just had the rest of my life open in front of me to build muscle. I was like, hell yeah. And I really wanted to start. So in order to discuss how I go about it, first I want to clarify that while in general the process is the same, the principles behind the process of bulking are the same, I will apply them differently depending on the individual. So when you hear my story, I will do my best to characterize how my body works, but bear in mind, whenever I might not say it explicitly, that it is implied that this is just my own individual process. So first of all, I am a very small person. I am 5 foot, nothing. There's nothing after the foot. So I don't have an enormous calorie budget at maintenance. And Ruby has something to say. Go ahead.
Yes, I think that this is something that is going to hit a lot of you ladies, because many of you are on the petite side. And if you're anything like me as well, because I'm 5'1.7", and yes, I'm going to include the 0.7 on my one because I can, but probably you as well, but I don't have a waist. And my biggest fear was that anything that I eat is going to go to my waist. Every time I try to build, it's just my waist. And because of that belief, I held myself back for years, which I'll get into that after Nikias' story. But this is something that relates to you just as much, because it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, we all have the same insecurities. And this is just so important.
Absolutely. I want to clarify that I work with both. I work with cisgender men, I work with cisgender women, I work with trans people who are both men and women, I work with non-binary people. And when it comes to bulking, I tend to attract people who are similar to me with my coaching style, because I try to put across my personality on all the social media platforms that I have, on my podcast and blog. So the people I tend to attract are people who, like me, are a bit on the conservative side, where they don't want to put on a lot of body fat. They are a little bit afraid of bulking, and they can get into cycles where they tell themselves, I want to bulk, but then they don't, which is what happened with my very first bulk back in 2019. So I completely understand that fear, and I will speak a little bit to my own insecurities that have certainly improved over the years. So my first reassurance, well, my first learning point, I suppose, that I want to share is that throughout the process of repeating cutting and bulking phases over and over again, you are going to gain a lot more confidence. You will prove to yourself that you can lose any fat you gain with the fat loss phases that you will be doing. And you can also prove to yourself that you're not going to go off the rails just because you have more calories available in a bulking phase. And you can be just as focused as you are in a fat loss phase and get really great results. Going back to my story, since I am small, I have a relatively small calorie budget, and I'm not an athlete. I am an online coach who works from home. I am relatively active in that I aim for 12 to 13,000 steps per day on average every week. And I also lift weights 5 days per week, typically. But I am not one of those people with incredibly fast metabolisms where when I'm bulking on 3,000 calories. I'm not even bulking on 2,000 calories most of the time. And in fact, if anything, without meds, my metabolism would be underactive because I also suffer from, well, it's not exactly hypothyroidism, but it's an underactive thyroid in that I'm always on the brink of hypothyroidism. So I take medication to make sure that I am just right above that, essentially. So for all these reasons, when I started my bulking phase, I usually take a very simple approach whereby I increase my caloric intake by about 100 calories because I know that in many cases that's enough to move the needle for me. And then an important difference between a fat loss phase and a bulking phase is that when you're bulking, you are going to see changes in muscle growth much more slowly, as Ruby pointed out. And when I say see, I don't mean literally. You may not be able to see muscle grow on your body as you can see fat loss occurring. But what I mean is that when you're looking at tracking your data, I track my body weight and my physique pictures, and I don't expect my body weight to change within a week like I might during a fat loss phase. I typically look at my body weight over the course of 2 to 4 weeks to assess changes. So in the initial 2 weeks, I expected quite a relatively large change in body weight just because I would be eating more food, so I would have more food in my gut. I would be eating more carbs, so I would absorb more water because each gram of carbohydrate is absorbed with about 3 to 4 grams of water, which are usually stored in your muscle. So you're going to weigh more because of that. And also because I would have more energy, I was expecting to potentially incur more training related inflammation from pushing harder in the gym because of the extra energy. I was also in this position where I hadn't trained in quite a long time. And when that happens and you reintroduce a training stimulus, you can also expect to see some body recomposition pretty fast. So if I had been at maintenance, I would have expected to potentially see a visible change in my physique, even without my weight changing. As in, I would have expected to see my muscle coming back on and the little bit of fat I had gained to within the span of 2 to 4 weeks, because that's the power of body recomposition when you haven't trained for a while. Since I was in a surplus, I was then prepared to see an even faster rate of body weight gain that I would have anticipated because I was adding that extra bit of nutrition. Well, let me rephrase that. I was not only training again and stimulating my muscles to grow, I also included not maintenance calories, but an extra amount of calories just to feed those muscles, so to speak. So I expected even faster changes in the realm of increasing my body weight. And then once those initial 2 to 4 weeks of getting back into training and experiencing this body recomposition settled, I expected to settle into a more moderate rate of change in body weight, which for me, over the course of the last, let me count first, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. It's now 8 months that I've been in a bulking phase. I have gained a total of 10 pounds. So for me, it's been a little bit over a pound per month that my body weight has changed. Essentially, it's been a change of about 1% of my body weight per month, which is excellent because I usually aim for me and my clients to gain between 0.5 and 1.5% of their body weight per month. roughly. Having said that, there are cases when I don't worry about it so much because I also monitor in terms of data to track your progress. I monitor body weight, but that's the data that I'm less attached to because the scale weight will not differentiate between fat loss, or rather fat and muscle. The data I am more attached to when it comes to a bulking phase are training performance, because the most reliable proxy for muscle growth that we have is progressive overload over time. So I want to see, are your lifts across the board going up in terms of weight and or reps over a number of weeks and months? It will depend on how advanced you are. The more advanced you are, the slower your progress. Although the difference is, if you already have been through a bulking phase before, or if I've coached you through one, we will know that typically I see your rate of progress go up slightly in a bulking phase versus a maintenance phase, a maintenance calories, or a fat loss phase, because of the extra calories available and the extra energy. So I am looking also for that slight difference. And then the final metric that I track is, as I've said, for myself, physique pictures only. Full disclosure, I don't want to take measurements. I used to take them. It's time consuming. I don't find them particularly useful for myself, especially with all of the body fat redistribution I underwent because I have been on testosterone replacement therapy since 2018. So I basically stopped taking them at some point in 2020 and I never started again.
Can I just say that, like, this is my opinion, because if you think about the fact that we want to do this for life anyway, the worst thing that you can do is hyperfixate on body measurements. Not only if you take the slightest millimeter off, it can completely skew your reading. But if you're someone like both of us, or actually, I'm not even going to say that because you probably don't see yourself as you are, which we already spoke about in our last episode. Just if you don't have a lot of fat to lose, taking, like, this is where progress photos, this is where body weight measurements, and this is also where tape measurements are the worst proxy for anything, because your body hardly changes. Like the scale weight, yeah, okay, if you're okay with actually chasing it upwards, which that could be a great one as well, but many people aren't. It's just, what I'm trying to say here is tape measurements and photos are the worst thing that you can go off in a building phase because it is such a slow process. Maybe taking, actually not even maybe, definitely taking gym selfies, taking gym videos, because when you compare them year to year, the change you see in your muscle density, the muscle maturity, the muscle definition, the leanness, which happens from adding muscle tissue, not from losing body fat, is going to show so much more, because you'll get leaner the more that you build muscle. And even at the same body fat percentage, you will look so much leaner with a shit ton more muscle. Keep going, because I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of other shit when you're done.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you, Ruby. I think it's actually useful to take measurements and physique pictures. However, with regard to physique pictures, I like for my clients to take them when they're flexing and when they are relaxed, because when you are flexing, you are going to see your muscle mass much more clearly. So that gives you a better indication of whether changes are occurring in a bulking phase. And the second caveat I have is that you need to be more patient. When you take these physique pictures, I wouldn't take them more than once a month. And in a bulking phase, I would not compare them for at least a good 4 to 6 months. And
That's
even
the hard
better,
thing, though.
and even
That's the
better,
hard thing, though, because most people that like, I attract a lot of people who have a history of nitpicking themselves to the nth degree. That's like my come at this. But yeah,
really understand. I have clients like that as well. In fact, with them, don't want to say I enforce it, because I can't really order people around, although I like to think I can do that in my position as a coach. But I do ask the people who are going to be more critical about their physique to send me their pictures, delete them right away, and promise to themselves and to me not to look at them. And I use this analogy for them. I tell them this is simply data, just like you rate your sleep and your stress levels on the spreadsheet that we share, and you don't think much about it. Send the pictures and don't think much about them. I promise to you that if they become relevant, I will tell you about it. And I always do. If pictures become relevant for the work that we're doing together, then I will tell them, based on the comparison I'm making between this date and this date, this is the coaching decision I want to make. In any case, I would recommend taking progress pictures once a month and only comparing them in a bulking phase after 4 to 6 months minimum. But also, this will depend on how advanced you are. If you've been training 12 years, you're not going to see much of a difference in muscle mass after 6 months. The best would be to compare the physique pictures you take at a certain body weight with the physique pictures that you took maybe the previous year at the same exact body weight, so that you can see whether you have gained muscle and or lost body fat, so you look leaner at the same body weight, or you look bigger, as in more muscular, at the same body weight. In any case, with regard to measurements, I also wouldn't recommend them more than once a month, and I actually prefer physique pictures on the whole, because there is a degree of human error when it comes to taking measurements. So if you wanted to reduce the human error as much as possible, I would recommend taking them once a week, because then you're practicing regularly. And I have some clients who do that, but then it really comes down to your relationship with numbers, because just like some people can get a bit too much in their head about the numbers on the scale, some people get equally in their head about the numbers on the tape measurements. And ultimately, if that's what's happening to you, then you want to dial back the frequency of the measurements, but then you will need to accept some degree of measurement error. And in a bulking phase, I also don't particularly trust measurements, because what you're going to see is an increase in measurements due to a small accumulation of body fat, but also due to extra swelling, usually from the extra water and carbohydrate in your muscle, as well as swelling from training-related inflammation, from training as hard as you can when you have that energy in a surplus. So my preference goes towards body weight on the scale weight, and physique pictures. Body weight just to track the trend over the course of the month, and rather than the difference between muscle and fat, which the scale can't capture, and physique pictures to track what your physique looks like month to month. And
I'm gonna just, I don't know what you are about to go into, but I feel like this is a really important time now to kind of interject with this particular thing, because I feel like I don't want to harp on too much about measurements and progress metrics, because I feel like we still give too much, we give way too much air. Like we probably should have left that for the end of the podcast, but the reason I'm saying this is because you listening to this, what we just mentioned doesn't matter a thing. Like, I don't even care about those photos, I don't care about those measurements, and I know that he wouldn't either. We already know, like, if you're not following the process of building muscle, you can't expect any of those metrics to change. It's just like waiting for seeds to sprout when you don't even know that the seeds have pretty much died, because you never actually tended to them past the first month, because it's not germinating. I can't see anything happening. I can't be bothered watering it anymore, because nothing exciting was happening for the first month or the first 8 weeks or even the first 12 weeks, like you would see in a fat loss phase happen in the first 4 weeks, because you would, if you actually do the process that we both spoke about on our last podcast together, you would see amazing fat loss results in your first month. Amazing, because you set it up for the right thing. You got rid of diet fatigue. So that's what you expect, but you can't expect that same thing when you're going into muscle building, and you can't expect to see amazing flowers blooming everywhere if you haven't actually watered it, despite not seeing much change, which is why we need to actually get clear on what you should be tracking more than anything else. And that's not anything to do with your body. It's got to do with what you're writing down in the logbook. It's got to do with what you're filming in the gym, because it doesn't matter how much you're increasing your squat if you never actually filmed your squat to only realize that you weren't actually squatting. You were bouncing up and down about a 1/4 inch. Like, check your form, standardize your form, improve your form, do things that are tailored towards the outcome that you want, because then you can actually expect to see change. Because it's kind of ridiculous to expect to see your hamstrings change when your hinging has never got improved. Like, you never improved your hinging. You never actually used the leg curl properly, because it was momentum and it was putting pressure into all other areas, because that's also a really easy thing to do. Why do you think hamstrings are one of the hardest things for women to build? because it actually requires some technique in that area. And yes, it takes time to do. And that's the point. It's so rewarding if you realize you can't expect to see this lean, defined physique if you haven't built that lean first. And all of that comes down to the logbook. And if you see, like, it probably just doesn't even cross your mind either, because you train naturally really freaking hard. It's part of what you do. That is like your thing. We train ourselves hard. And like, I'd never even think of it twice until someone mentions it to me or says, you train really hard. I see myself as just like someone who trains normally, because I always compare myself to the males. But then when males come up to me and say, wow, you're actually really strong. Wow, you train really hard. It's like, oh my God, this is actually like in the minority. So if you're a woman pursuing this, realize you are in the minority, because it is very rare for women in particular to be pushing themselves. Like males, they typically do that. Mostly it's males that need to like zen the fuck out and stop doing so much. But at this, like, this is where your missing link is. Stop caring about what the scale says. Stop caring about your physique photos. Stop caring about any measurements of anything if you're not actually measuring the things that are gonna drive change in those outcome areas. Because otherwise you're just gonna keep letting yourself down, getting defeated, and then losing self-trust in the process. And the reason I wanted to interject here is because I wanted to bring it around to what you said at the first, where people are showing the fat loss process because bulking it kind of makes it off that bulking's worse, where I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's because people think that bulking's worse. I hate the word bulking. I'll never use it. I'll use building. But I think it's because of the fact that no one's ever been, I know it's because of this, because I've mentioned on every single podcast by now. It's because you don't know where to look. You don't know where to focus. You don't know how to train for physique change, because it is not physique change if your program isn't properly progressively overloaded, which doesn't mean changing your program because it's week 8 or because it's week 10. It's actually getting stronger on the same movements. And like you said, when you've been training for years, you're not going to see that many changes in your body. Well, you're not going to see that many changes in your physique logs either. Like, if you've stuck with an exercise for long enough, you're going to keep fiddling between the same weights, especially for upper body, because we cannot progress our upper body at the same rate as our lower body. And if you're going to get down on yourself and then switch shoulder presses because you haven't improved on your shoulder presses in the last month or two, well, no shit, it's your shoulders. And if you're doing them right with the full range of motion, they're going to be really hard to increase the weight on if you're going from 12 to 15 kilos. This is where I will kind of say get micro plates. But you can chase the reps up. You can keep trying to improve there. But also keep in mind that everything you do in your program has a spill-on effect. So if you've got a lot of squat patterns or a lot of quad focus movements, then don't expect your quad movements to increase as much as if you had less volume for it. But at the same time, what are we trying to get out of this? We're trying to get hypertrophy out of this. And if we're frequently taking that muscle to the effective reps, to the stimulative reps, you're going to get the results. It's just you need to keep showing up and giving your best effort until your form fails, until you fail. Then you know that you did your job, you recover, you come back. And you can actually get a lot more out of it because now you're well fueled. And I will ask you a question on that one as well, because I kind of want to tie into what I think is going to be really important out of this, because you did mention you did too many cuts and you only did a short maintenance phase. And I think that's very tailored to this. But this is just like my hugest rant, because it even happens with fat loss. People are too focused on the outcome measurements that you're never going to see the change there. You're always going to feel let down because you're going to be comparing outcome you already are comparing outcome measurements to what you see online. And that's just the harsh reality check that I need to say right now, because I'm seeing it everywhere. You're expecting this before and after transition because Joe Doe on the internet, who's selling his bikini programs, got these 8 weeks. They're not even 8 weeks. They're more like 8 months or 2 years that he flash it around saying they're 8 weeks when they're not actually 8 weeks. And if that was achieved in 8 weeks, that is not even going to be sustainable, because what's going to happen after that? There is no way that what they did between such extremes is going to be sustainable. And regardless, you're not an after photo. I had a client say to me that she's always been chasing after photos. That's why she was never fulfilled. She was always like doing more. And then she never actually got any traction. And this is the thing. You're not an after photo, because you can get that after photo. Then what's going to happen? Look at my before and after. And then you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you were back at that last after photo because you didn't even think about what was going to happen next. It doesn't matter if I start smoking, I'll deal with my lungs later. You're not going to see that when you have lung cancer. I don't know why I brought that into it, but it's just like a similar analogy. We need to focus on the elements of what leads to muscle building and and there is no point expecting change. This is where I'm going to come to now with the cuts. There's no point expecting change or expecting to see the progress at the rate that we want to see it in strength. Because I had my coach say this to me as well. I can't remember if I messaged it to you, but he's like, if you want to see your strength keep continuing to track up and have you feel like you're progressing forwards in such way, we need to have even more fuel coming in, because I'm starting to move into this building phase. But because I've been so wish-washy with my training times, I want to make sure I have never not been in maintenance. I have never been in a deficit since 2020, 2021. So when I say that I'm not eating as much, I do not mean that I'm in a deficit. I've continuously been at least 2,300 calories this whole time. My building calories should be around 26, 2,700. That is what I'm aiming to move up to once I have my sleep in check, once I have my schedule in routine, and once I'm actually fueling around my workouts, because that kind of fell apart when my training schedule changed. So now I'm like, I want to bring it back. I need to prioritize my sleep, because there's no point trying to build muscle if you're not, always try to build muscle. There's no point trying to do it in a surplus until your sleep is in check, because that isn't going to be optimal for building muscle the best way possible. Although I wouldn't be totally against it if you pushed more of an aggressive maintenance. Just make sure that you try to get some form of system. You're getting at least 6 hours of sleep, and you can lean on these habits to allow you to trust yourself, because most of the time we cut ourselves short out of a building phase, or we end up feeling like we're gaining too much fat, that we then do some stupid reaction to it and then stop ourselves from ever getting to where we want to be. That's why I had to do that rant. It's like, if you can't keep that trust in yourself to do a building phase for long enough, which is longer than 12 weeks. It's at least a year. Try do it for 2 years. If you can put in the patience to get yourself to a phase where you're building for 2 years and then maintaining that without even slashing your calories for another year, for 3 years, focusing on all of these elements that I just mentioned with your training, focusing on getting as strong as possible, progressing in your training, putting in your best efforts, you will never really need to do a fat loss phase ever again, because as soon as you do that fat loss phase after that build, you're going to see the definition, the leanness that you always wanted. But that's not going to happen if you keep testing out the waters, doing mini cuts every 4 weeks, because you want to see what's happened, or you don't want to get too fluffy and rant. Too many cuts. That was the question to you. You said that you were doing too many cuts and you didn't do the maintenance phase for long enough, sort of things. How did that hold you back? And then where can we start moving this forward now so that people can start implementing this stuff the right way and start focusing on the right things?
I must have miscommunicated. I never said I did too many cuts, at least not on this podcast. Maybe you are referring to the fact that I spoke about the fact that in 2021 and 2022, I ended up doing 2 photo shoot preps where I underwent a 6-month diet in order to lose fat, to be as lean as I could, for a photo shoot that I did in April 2021 and then another one that I did in August 2022. In hindsight, that held me back from spending a long time building muscle, because of course for 6 months out of the year I was focused on losing fat. But not only that, I achieved a degree of leanness that wasn't sustainable for me long term. So I had to undergo what bodybuilders would refer to as the post-diet recovery process afterwards. And when you are undergoing that recovery process, you are trying to regain body fat primarily to get back to a body fat level that's sustainable for you. And in the process of doing that, while you will be building muscle as well, it won't be the same as when you are at that sustainable level of body fat. So what I wanted to speak about, it was the fact that was a number of things that used to hold me back in a bulking phase, especially from the mindset perspective, which I think will be helpful. So first of all, and the 2 photo shoots come into that, I was more focused on seeing leanness in my physique as opposed to seeing muscle growth. I preferred at the time to see a leaner physique. I believe that also distorted my view of my physique, where when I look at pictures of when I was in a smaller body than I am now I am basically the heaviest that I normally get to in a bulking phase. And normally at this point, I would consider a fat loss phase, whereas this time I haven't yet because I actually really like my physique at the moment. And this bulking phase is going really well. But when I look at pictures of when I was leaner, my physique was leaner, and I used to prefer that look. Now I notice how small I look, and I think to myself, I look like my physique looks really scrawny in these pictures. But when I was that lean, and that was my preference, I only saw the muscle definition that I had, and not so much the fact that I was still small in terms of my muscular development.
And anything away from that, I bet that you started feeling fluffy as well. Because if you can't see the video, everything that he's saying is what I felt too. Like, yeah, explain that part, because I feel like that needs to be addressed. Where you thought that you were only focusing on the lean, and then anything away. If when you still had moments where you felt really fluffy then, but now when you're looking back on it, it's like, I'm actually in my best physique now. Holy shit, I was actually tiny then. I built so much muscle because I've trusted myself.
Yes, which is a good segue into the second insecurity that I had, which was gaining weight too fast. Because as Ruby said, when I gained maybe say 5 pounds roughly, I would already miss the leaner look that my physique had those 5 pounds earlier. And so as a result of that, I held myself back by overtly focusing on the changes in scale weights, whereby I was really trying to micromanage the speed at which my weight went up. I wanted to nail not only the range that I gave you earlier of 0.5 to 1.5% of body weight gain per month, I wanted to nail the specific percentage change. If I said I am going to bulk at a rate of, and I want to gain at a rate of 0.75%, if it wasn't exactly 0.75%, it was 0.8 or 0.9 or 1%, I thought I was gaining too fast, and I would therefore tend to drop my calories back down, which resulted ultimately in a cycle of thinking I was in a bulking phase, so in a surplus, and actually spending a lot of time at maintenance. And this was probably the biggest mistake I made in my first ever bulking phase in 2019. And then in November, I thought, all right, now I want to go into a surplus and build muscle. I wasn't actually in a surplus until June 2020, 2019. So I spent 6 months telling myself that I was going to be in a surplus, and then because I was gaining, in quotation marks, too fast, I dropped the calories back down to what ultimately was maintenance. Then I injured myself in May, so I was out of the gym for a month, and finally in June I was like, fuck this, I've waited far too long pretending that I was bulking, now I'm going to actually bulk. And I spent the following year and a half cycling through primarily a surplus with the odd week or so at maintenance calories. And that's when I really started seeing changes in my physique with respect to gaining more muscle. So these have been my two main insecurities for the entirety of my bodybuilding journey, because in case you don't know, I come from a background where I had an eating disorder when I was a teenager, and that was anorexia nervosa, because I was overweight. I lost a lot of weight very fast, and I then became obsessed with maintaining that tiny body. So psychologically, I am in a way wired towards being afraid of gaining body fat when I'm bulking. Throughout discussing my process, you might have noticed that I've been speaking about this latest bulking phase from a really positive mindset. And I want to tell you now that even when I started right after top surgery, since I was pretty lean, I did not have the same exact mindsets. So if you start a bulking phase and you feel similarly to where you're a little bit afraid of the body fat gain and you're focusing on that more so on the fact then on the fact that you are acting in alignment with your goal of building muscle. Trust the process, because the more you get used to being in this new phase, the more you see that you are making progress in the gym and you feel differently, because in a surplus you will have more energy and more zest for life, especially if you come from a long time of reducing your calories and constantly feeling deprived. You will certainly notice a difference. The more you practice these behaviors, the more at ease you will become with the changes, and you will really start to understand this phrase that I heard once and I always really liked, which is that you're putting on pounds for a purpose. It's a phrase that always makes me laugh, and I think it's really telling, in that yes, you at first you will tell yourself, I want to put on muscle, I will accept it reluctantly, the change in body fat. But the more you get used to the process, the more you believe what you said. At the start, you might fake it till you make it, but then you actually make it, and you become a lot more comfortable with the process that you are going through, because you know that it's aligned with your goals and it makes you feel good. It doesn't only lead, you basically stop focusing so much on waiting for the muscle growth to show, and you start leaning into how enjoyable it is to pursue growth instead of continuing always pursuing getting smaller and leaner, which has its place, but if you obsess over it, then it can wear you down ultimately.
I actually love the fact that you mentioned that, because I feel like so many of us expect to feel amazing when we just start eating more and when we just start on this building phase. But it's very hard to experience that if you haven't yet worked on your relationship, on how you view things, and realize that your version of reality doesn't match everyone else's reality. And it can, like, you can feel like you're getting bigger, you can feel like you're gaining fat, you can feel like things are getting worse before they eventually get better, because it feels very different. You're going to feel full. It is a foreign feeling. And when something feels different, it can start feeling wrong. And this is where we need to set the expectations. And this is kind of where I was going before, which I think is a really great way to sort of tie up this podcast, in that it's not that meant people think bulking is worse, or whatever misconceptions are around it. It's not even anything that you probably think it is. It's more so that we have misaligned expectations of what the building process looks like. We've approached it the wrong way. We think that just not dieting means that, okay, we can go all into building and we're going to see muscle change. No, because you do need a training program that is designed for building muscle. And it needs to be, it's not even just the program itself, it's how you're lifting. It's how you're executing. It's the effort that you're putting in, because nothing else matters if the effort isn't there for you to actually signal, hey, I want you to grow muscle. You need to adapt to this change because I'm putting a high level of stress on you. And then it is, okay, so is this fuel actually matching the training that you're doing? Because you need to be able to recover. Something that I really want to talk about very soon is that people have gone from one side of the extreme to the other. Like, now everyone is highlighting a lot of things that Stacey Sims is saying that's wrong, because she's saying that fasted training is the worst thing that you can do for your hormones, and you need to eat within 45 minutes and blah, blah, blah. And everything that she's saying is completely false. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, because people are trying to come at it to try to show that what she's saying is wrong, now all of a sudden we have, it doesn't matter what time you eat your food before, it doesn't matter what time you eat after. It's like, no, meal timing matters, because if you're not recovering, that has a lot to say with the fact that you did not have enough protein in the system to repair the muscle that was being, I want to say, torn up, but we know that it's not just torn up, it's just the tension that you put it under, which tension isn't always the same as tearing up a muscle, even though, yeah, you sometimes do tear the muscle. It's just like not muscle damage. There's a difference between muscle tears and muscle damage. Regardless, it's like you didn't have the materials there to help you recover fast enough. And the longer that you stay in a non-fed state after, the higher your cortisol will stay elevated. And cortisol is an amazing thing. You want cortisol to be really high when you're training, but you want it to recover and come back down through fueling. And then if you screw that up, of course your metabolism is going to get whacked, quote unquote. Of course your hormones are going to get fucked, quote unquote. Of course you're going to end up gaining more body fat, quote unquote. Because now you have wacky blood glucose levels. You're going to end up raiding the pantry at nighttime because you were told that meal timing doesn't matter. And if you were training hard, you probably weren't training hard to the absolute level because you didn't fuel yourself properly before it. So yes, meal timing does matter for optimal physique progress, regardless of what anyone says. But no, you're not going to die and rivel into a little dead bug. Or like it's like what they're saying is true, but it's also not true. We need to realize what is the outcome that I want. I want to fuel it. People say, well, it doesn't matter. You can still get great body composition results. It's like, well, yeah, you can slightly see some changes until you actually are past the newbie phase and you want to see more and more out of it. And if you're a busy mother and if you've been chasing fat loss for your whole life and now you're in your 35s, in your 40s, this shit matters more because everything you're doing is also fighting for muscle loss. And a calorie deficit is the best place for muscle loss if you aren't putting in these things in practice. And that was just something I wanted to rant on about the building, the actual fueling for it as well, because eating more doesn't equal muscle. Bumping up your carbs because you need carbs doesn't equal more muscle. Training harder and lifting heavier doesn't equal more muscle. It's how does it all come together? What does it actually look like in the system of a strategy that progresses over time? And what is your meaning of progressive overload? What is your meaning of training hard? How is your extra carbs and extra fuel helping you do the very things that we need to get the results that we want? Because you can't expect results from it unless you do that. But you can be doing all the things right and still not see any change because your expectations then are the ones that need examining. So we have everything in check. Expectations. That is now the metric system. It's not in little chunks now, it's in big chunks. Are you realistic with the time frame it takes to see changes? Then are you willing to stay pushing through when it's summertime and the first thing that comes to mind is I need to lean up for summer? Because that, more than anything, is where most people screw up. They want to get lean for summer and you never gave yourself enough time to build for long enough. And it might have taken you 3 months to even get into your build. So what did you build for? Like 3-4 months? Like it takes time to build this up. It takes time to start fueling, to start accumulating these things. But would you rather keep yo-yoing between both for every single summer looking worse over time because you never actually put anything into building realistically? Or would you rather set yourself up for long-term success where you never need to diet again because you did it right, you built the muscle, and now you're realizing all this time along, when you look back at yourself, holy shit, I was keeping myself stuck. What a bloody mungan.
Let me build on what you just said, Ruby, to give the dear listeners some practical applications of what we discussed. And then I'm going to have to wrap up the conversation together. So what I want to close on, based on riffing off on what Ruby has just spoken about, is how to go about the process of building muscle in a surplus. So the actionable steps you want to focus on. And then I have some reflections to make on how the process is going to look like and what matters and what may not matter as much based on the comments that Ruby brought up about Stacy Sims, for example. But first, what are the components of the process that you need to prioritize? This is the hill I will die on, because we always think about the fact that in a bulking phase or a building phase, whatever you want to call it, you're likely going to be in a surplus. We always prioritize nutrition in our thinking. But what's most important if you're trying to build muscle is your training program. Training is the only stimulus for muscle growth that we know of right now, apart from steroids. So your training needs to be your top priority if your main goal is muscle growth. So the most important priority when it comes to training is your consistency. Therefore, you want to identify a number of training sessions per week that you are able to stick to consistently, which doesn't mean you can never change them. If there are phases in your life where you can train 5 times and phases where you can only train 4, you can shift between the two frequencies. No problem. What's important is that within the specific phase of life that you're looking at, you nail down a consistency, a training frequency that you can stick with. Now, once you have nailed your consistency, which is always the utmost priority. In order to build muscle, you need to have targeted form to train the muscles that you want to grow. You need to train close enough to failure, leaving 1 to 2 repetitions in reserve before hitting failure, or you want to hit straight up failure. It will depend on the person. And on some lifts, it will even be enough to hit around 3 reps in reserve. So it depends on the exercises. But if you're leaving 1 to 3 repetitions before failure, you're training really goddamn hard. And the other, in addition to that, my current read of the scientific literature on hypertrophy is that you want to perform as much training volume, so as many sets for the main body parts that you want to grow within a week, that you can make progress with and recover from. So it's not do as much as you possibly can and always feel like you can't even sleep at night because you're that sore, but it is, if you are performing, let's say, 12 sets per week for your glutes and you're recovering really well, you don't get particularly sore, and you're making progress in your lifts, and you have the time availability to maybe add an extra set, then why not? In my opinion, that could only lead to better results up until you realize that you've hit a point where you either no longer have the time to do it, or you're no longer recovering. It's not either or, there are 3 options. You're no longer recovering, you don't have the time, or you are no longer seeing progress with regard to progressive overload, so more reps and or more weight over time. So training needs to be your top priority, and within the big category of training, these are the other priorities. Whereas from the perspective of nutrition and lifestyle, the main priority is to be in a surplus, because if you want to gain muscle at the fastest rate possible, being in a surplus will aid that. It does not stimulate muscle growth on its own, only training and steroids do that, but it will aid the process of building muscle. Beyond that, the second most important component will be protein, because protein is, as everybody knows, the main building block of muscle. And from a lifestyle perspective, you want to do the best that you can to manage your stress and to get enough high quality sleep. There are other components that can play a role. For example, eating enough before and after training can play a role in your results. But the point that I want to end the podcast on is that the degree to which this matters depends on your personal priorities. Because so far we've used terms like maximizing muscle gain, maximizing physique change, minimizing fat loss. These are really extreme terms. There's also a spectrum within that, where you might not want to maximize muscle growth, and you might be okay with not necessarily putting on as much muscle as you possibly can in this building phase, and maybe as a result of that you gain weight a little bit more slowly. You're not going to see the same degree of physique change. This really comes down to you as an individual. If you are a busy, self-employed professional with kids, and you can only have the time to train 3 times per week, you're not maximizing muscle growth, because your priority is your kids and your work. So already fitness is the third priority. So yes, you're going to build muscle, but within the constraints of training 3 times per week, that means that you might not need that much fuel. It definitely means you won't need as much fuel, because we want to match the calories that you're eating to the training stimulus. So if you're training 4, 5, 6 days per week, you will need much more fuel. And that's okay. Like, not everybody needs to maximize every aspect of the process in order to see good results. What you need is the right guidance, the right coach who will give you appropriate expectations, to where when I have a client who tells me, I really want to build more muscle, but I can only train 3 days a week for an hour, I will tell them, fine, but then you need to expect that your changes will occur much more slowly, because you do not have the time availability to do any more than this. Or if somebody tells me, I really want to build muscle, but right now I can only really get 6 hours sleep per night. I know I need more, basically, for my sleep to be optimal. I will tell them, that's okay. We need to accept that in that case, I might not put you in the same surplus that I would put you in otherwise, wise, it will be a smaller one, because if we were to be in a larger surplus, there's the possibility that the way that your sleep is right now, and obviously depends on how bad the sleep actually is, but let's say it's bad enough to concern me. If I put you in a larger surplus, then we would be likely seeing a bit more fat gain rather than muscle growth than you would be comfortable with. That's why we're holding back on the surplus and keeping you in a smaller one. We don't necessarily need to stay at maintenance. In some cases that's necessary, but not always. In essence, what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to go from zero to hero. There is a spectrum of a gradation in the targets that you are going to set yourself, which depends on your own individual constraints. And everybody has constraints, and everybody has a different view and different priorities regarding their physique. And that's fine as long as you get realistic expectations about what that is going to look like with regard to the results that you get, whereby I try my best not to hype up a client and tell them that they're going to build as much muscle as is possible for them. We're not going to meet their muscular potential if they have a lot of constraints that make me think that we won't. Because if you set yourself up with this mismatch between expectations and reality, you are going to eventually hold yourself back because you get discouraged, just like Ruby has spoken about plenty. So this is where I want to end the podcast. I wanted to give you these realistic expectations. I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into what matters the most in this surplus phase, if you choose to undergo it, and also hopefully my own personal story of my process, which was my first time sharing actually, so it was quite fun to do, gave you a little bit of an insight into how my own brain works, for example, because even coaches have insecurities, and also how your own mindset might change as you go through the process itself and what you might want to expect.
I absolutely love all of this because that summed it up really nicely. You need to be able to zoom out and have the awareness to ask yourself, is what I'm doing adding up to get the results that I expect to see? Because if you want to see this physique that you've been chasing your whole life, then it makes sense to trust a kind of different process, whereas it's not really all that different. It's just that you need to trust yourself to go all in for long enough to build the muscle that you want, but you need to stop focusing on the wrong stuff and start focusing all in on the training, because it's training that builds the physique. Nothing else you do is going to sculpt muscle. You can't sculpt muscle from eating food alone or from protein alone. It needs to be built. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Nikias and I will put everything down below. And if you have any other questions regarding building muscle, do let any of us know and we will respond to you because we are responsive, and you will hear me on the next podcast.